Welcome to I Love This Thing So Fricking Much, a podcast about passion. My name is Sophie Katz, and today I am joined by Angel, an avid consumer of fictional stories. Welcome to the show, Angel.
Hi, I'm so glad to be here.
Oh, I'm so glad to have you here. So, here's how this works. Angel will have 3 minutes to talk about something that she loves. This can be a person, place, thing, concept, activity, anything she wants. Our only requirement is that she loves it wholeheartedly and wants to tell us why. Are you ready, Angel?
I am.
Good. Got my timer here. Now, what do you love so freaking much?
All right, so I love morally gray characters. And I don't know if it's because I'm a middle child or just autistic. It could be both. But I love those characters that ride the line between what is good and bad, right? If a story has a morally gray character, I'm going to immediately love that story. It's one of the reasons I love Star Wars so much, right? Our king of morally gray is Anakin Skywalker. Love him. I don't know how familiar you are with Akatar, but Tamlin and Reese, I consider also both morally gray. And I never finished Once Upon a Time, okay? So I don't know how his story ends, but from what I saw, what I was obsessed with, Rumpelstiltskin was a morally gray character in my eyes. And I do just want to make it clear that I don't necessarily condone the actions of morally gray characters. Okay, because Anakin slaughtering an entire village of Tusken Raiders, that was not cool. I love that Anakin exists. I love what, morally great characters add to stories. And I think that's because as a kid, we're so used to seeing like the good versus bad guy narrative in stories, where it's clear who that good guy is, who that bad guy is, what are their motivations that make them, either or. But when morally gray characters come in, they do their little bad thing and they make you stop and think, well, given those circumstances, I mean, how bad was it? Like, could I forgive this guy? Or girl, could I forgive them? And I love what that adds to like the consumption of a story. You have to like reconcile that thought in your brain, like, oh, well, this person, might have done some bad things, but I think I like them anyways. And so the reason, they make my autistic middle child brain so happy is because they create this room for middle ground, which I adore as a middle child. But because I'm autistic, I often struggle with like rigid thinking. And these characters are able to come in and allow my brain this like safe space in this fictional world to consider and contemplate something outside the rigidity of like good versus bad. And my brain gets all tingly when I realize I'm doing that. And so for me, that's like what it comes down to is that these are fictional stories where we as real people are safe and able to explore and experience these worlds and circumstances that like we otherwise wouldn't be able to. So I really love what morally great characters are able to add to that experience, even if I don't necessarily condone what that morally great character has done. I love what they add. I love their presence, their being. That's all I wrote down because I did go by a guide. I'm so sorry.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you for telling us about morally gray characters today.
You're welcome.
How did you first get interested in morally gray characters? Was one of these characters the first one who caught your attention and started to make you think about him?
It was definitely Zuko from Avatar, I think, although because of his redemption, I wouldn't officially classify him as morally gray. But I feel like that was like the earliest story I had consumed where like he starts out as this bad guy and you're like, yeah, this is the bad guy. But then he starts to realize, wait, am I the bad guy? Have I done some bad things? Could I maybe be better than this? So he doesn't like maintain that good and bad actions, right? But like the fact that he went through that in his own head was like, wow, I really love that they did that. Like I love that for that character. And then so when I started and I didn't know, the term morally gray until maybe like high school Tumblr era. And then I started like noticing it in more stories like, oh, this is what's happening. They're not having that redemption, but this is what's happening to them. Like Anakin from Star Wars.
It sounds like what caught your attention about Zuko is that he himself was going through the thought process of what is good, what is bad, how do my actions fit into all this, that you talked a lot about how what you love about these morally gray characters is that they spark these trains of thoughts in yourself.
Yeah, I will always love Zuko for doing that for me. And I wish some other characters could have that redemption. Because I love them so much. And I guess in a way you could say Anakin did have that at the end as Darth Vader, but
it took a very long time.
Right? And then, well, other characters get that. I don't know. And I just have to be okay with that. That's another thing. Like I have to be okay if they never have that redemption or that full realization themselves. I have to be okay with how they exist in a story.
Yeah, there's definitely a difference between a morally gray character and a redeemed character.
Which, again, I don't know how Once Upon a Time ended, but I'm pretty sure Rumpelstiltskin kind of maintained his just general chaotic, neutral mindset.
Well, certainly there is a place for villains in stories. You need that antagonistic force to come from somewhere. Sometimes it comes from the world and sometimes it
Mm-hmm.
comes from people. So it is very interesting and thought-provoking when a story introduces an element, introduces a character that complicates that, that makes you wonder if you're supposed to root for them or not.
Yes, that's exactly what I love about it. Because I know in real life, somebody did this kind of crappy things, I would not be rooting for them. I could maybe, understand and give them some sympathy, but I could not condone or like allow them to continue being in my life. But in fictional stories, well, yeah, I can keep consuming that fictional story. They're there and I love them for being there, but it's fictional, it's fake.
Yeah, like you said, this is a safe space to address very complicated issues. And certainly in the real world, there are lots of people who do what we would consider to be quote unquote objectively bad things, but because of their life circumstances, because of the systemic oppressions they're going through, they end up doing things. And that can be difficult to think about. So I wonder if stories like this can help us think about it in the real world.
Yes. And I definitely feel like that's exactly what it's done. Like, before, like if somebody did something bad, I'd just be like, oh, well, that's just a bad person. But now knowing that like these stories exist and that like my brain has been able to like practice, right? Because practice makes perfect, thinking and like justifying some quote unquote bad character actions that like, well, what might have caused that? Like, was there a reason? Were they just having like a crappy day? Are they just bad in general? Are they, yeah, it reminds me to like stop and slow down and consider that like real people are real people with stories that I'll never know. And so I have to like conceptualize that in a way that allows me to continue living with or without this person.
It seems like more and more often in our stories, in our media, we're getting these complicated characters where we kind of think of the story where you have the objectively good hero and the objectively bad villain as more childish than more mature stories where things are complicated. Talk a little more about how being a middle child makes you interested in morally gray characters.
Well, I consider the morally great characters the middle ground. And as the middle child, I was always in the middle, okay, of what my older brother and my younger sister were doing, right? Because I've always been people pleaser, okay? I'm not going to do anything to ruffle anybody's feathers or upset anybody. However, my brother and my sister, they have no problem going toe to toe with one another. And it would always be my job to like be like, hey, like let's calm down, let's compromise, let's figure this out, like whatever the problem is. Until my parents stepped in because I obviously was not well equipped enough to handle whatever they were arguing about because I couldn't imagine arguing about it myself. And so I've always been a big fan of compromise, right? Trying to make everybody happy if I can manage it. And so, like I said, morally great characters. They ride that middle line of, well, I'm neither, on this side or this side of the line. Like I'm just riding through and doing my own thing. And I'm like, man, I'm not like killing whole villages of people, but I also am riding that middle line.
Speaking as a middle child myself, I can only imagine that from the points of view of either sibling who is in the camp of what I'm doing is right and what they're doing is wrong, then that makes you by default the morally gray character to them by trying to relate to both at once.
Right? Because I'm not agreeing with either of them. It was me. I was the morally gray character all along.
Is there anything that you don't like about morally gray characters? And if so, how do you handle that?
Yeah, those behaviors that they do that make you think, oh, that was a real crappy thing to do, Anakin. Or like my favorite on like Akatar TikTok is people like hate Tamlin because of like his betrayal and like how he sold out Feyre to like get Feyre. Like, how could you sell her and her family out just to get her, anyways? Which was pretty silly hindsight. But like, I just love that he exists. I'm hoping he gets redemption and people will like condemn him. But yeah, the actions he did were definitely, I think, were pretty crappy. I don't condone it. Or Rumpelstiltskin. There were so many things Rumple did that made me like, stop it right now. You're ruining things for all of us. So whenever they're doing those things, I get so upset. I get so angry. And it takes me a while to come back to my love for the character. Because I'm like, how could you do this to me? As if I also am in the story myself.
Well, it just goes to show how much of an emotional connection you have to these stories, that what they do makes you feel things and makes you think.
I do love my fictional stories.
How do you handle it when you're on the internet and end up potentially arguing with someone who either thinks that this character is completely irredeemable or maybe is on the opposite side of things and doesn't want to see their flaws at all?
Well, there's the thing. I'm never going to argue with somebody on the internet.
That's good advice.
Yeah, I'm not much of an arguer. I love hearing people's points of view. Okay, I love it. I like to share mine, but I always try to like come with that disclaimer like, hey, I'm saying this just to share, not to argue. Please understand this is just how I see it. I love also like what a morally gray character causes people outside of the story to talk about. It's like, okay, well, you completely see him as like totally irredeemable. Like, well, here's my point of view. I love hearing your point of view. I think you got some solid points. So that's another thing. Like, I love that it encourages conversation. I love considering other people's points of view, which is probably a reason I love fictional stories. You get to see so many other people's points of view. But yeah, I use it not to argue, but to encourage discussion.
Angel, thank you so much for telling us about something you love today.
You're welcome.
And thank you, our listeners, for tuning in today. If you would like to learn more about morally gray characters or our guest Angel, you can find our social media information in the episode description. And if you have something you love so freaking much you want to tell me all about it, consider this your invitation to join the show. I Love This Thing So Freaking Much is a production of Through the Window Media. This episode was directed and edited by Sophie A. Katz. You can find us at Through the Window on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, or Tumblr. That is THROU the Window at all those social media sites. Be good to yourself, be kind to each other, and you'll hear from us again soon.